Good evening, everyone. Tonight is a work session of the South Kingstown Planning Board. The date is Tuesday, August 8th, 2023. The time is 7:03 p.m. We'll do roll call. Joe Murphy.
Here.
Susan Axelrod.
Here.
Paul Jordan.
Here.
Liz Carp.
Here.
Peter DiStefano.
Here.
Robin Pothier.
Here.
And Maria Mack is here. Our first agenda item is a mixed-use discussion, a continuation of our conversation relative to Old Tower Hill Road, Main Street. Jamie?
Thank you, Madam Chair. With regard to this agenda item, we've included it in the packet tonight. If there's any continued discussion, what I have is an update on the RFQ process. We had 3 firms respond. Those firms have been ranked by 5 of the 6 members of the panel. We're waiting for the 6th to respond. They are all close in the ranking and criteria on a scale of 1 to 100. There is less than 10 percentage points that separate the top ranked firm from the 3rd ranked firm. So our intent is to have that evaluation finalized this coming week, and we would intend to select 2 firms to do virtual interviews with in the next 2 to 3 weeks, depending on everyone's availability. The good thing with that 6-member panel is there's diversity. The result of that diversity is trying to get 6 people with a 2 or 3 hour window for everyone to meet, given that it's still August and vacation times. But we should be able to pull that off in late August with regards to finding a common time for a 3-4 hour window to conduct those interviews. So, again, we have 3 well-qualified respondents.
Would you just tell us again who's on the panel?
So we have myself, Jay Parker, Maria Mack, Rich Bourbonnais, who's the, in essence, public service or public works director, Luke Murray, who's the head administrator, and, am I forgetting someone? Terry Murphy, who's the director of Parks and Leisure. So we do have 1 representative from the planning board, 4 department heads, and 1 additional planning board department staff.
So Jamie, with regard to the Old Tower Hill Road, is it possible for us to just quickly look through the PowerPoint slides?
The PowerPoint from Will
Yeah.
that he did
the new
for
one that
council,
yeah. No, the other one, the 2 that
yeah, we can do that, Maria. Just give me a moment.
yeah. So this is excerpts from the initial class analysis that was done that I think brought forward a lot of important details that will be relevant as we move forward into the area, and certainly for any consultant.
Is it, Maria, the analysis or the final site plan present?
I think the analysis might be, they're both a little different. And obviously, things may have changed from 2019, but some of the things will not necessarily have changed.
So again, this is a copy of a presentation from Will Green in the University of Rhode Island's Sustainable Design Studio within the Landscape Architectural Program. So I'll just go through some of those slides. Who was in that again, this was a senior class as well as 3 graduate students, Brian Wagner being one of them, who's sitting to my left and your right. Again, looking at what sustainable New England Village looks like. Again, we're talking about the old Tower Hill Road, Main Street, and Kingstown Road.
Remarkable, isn't it, to look at that image? The amount of impervious surrounded by the green.
Again, their goals will look at sensitivity and resiliency with regards to the environment, ecological corridors, accommodating climate change, and connecting people to places. They looked at Freeport, Maine. And this is an outlet center in Freeport, Newport, Rhode Island. Westbrook Place in Vancouver. 4-story mixed use. I believe the buildings on the left side of the slide are 5 stories. And then an aerial view of Wakefield looking north. Looking west. So in the foreground here is Bank of America, CVS, Belmont Market, the substation. History and people. And again, what the kind of the point is that this corridor has always been evolving since the 1700s through the 1900s, through 2000, and then what's beyond 2000. I want to say there hasn't been significant change within the corridor between the 90s and now. I should say with the advent of a mini storage. And a slight 3D rendition of that from a railroad right away. Giving you again some historic context. Some demographics. And again, line 66 is a primary commuter run. Bike path that is located just south of the corridor. One thing to note is if you're in the corridor, there's no wayfinding or signage identifying that South County bike path even exists. And our primary corridors are 1A and 108. And I would say one thing, posted speed limit of 25, I think from local knowledge, you all realize that's not always observed. This gives you the concentric nature of what a 5-minute walk is and what a 10-minute walk is. So what's interesting, if you looked at the 10-minute radius, you're almost going to the to Green Line Pharmacy. So the next intersection here is the gas station and bike shop. Crosswalks. conditions of widths of sidewalks and conditions. Show you what night sky looks like. So if you look at the land mass, the predominant land use is parking versus buildings. But the uses in those buildings are auto-reliant. The different types of uses between medical, mixed use, restaurant, and commercial. Potential land available for development.
That's a surprise, isn't it?
We have Holly at the top, and there's some area, that's Ace Hardware, actually. That really would be, that's occupied, and you no longer have this building, because that is now the bank, and behind it is CubeSmart. And Maria mentioned early on in that original aerial photo is, the commercial area and kind of the lack of vegetation within that commercial area. And again, most of this was developed 60s, 70s as this commercial corridor laid out, and your regulations weren't landscape centric, so there was little to no requirement of any interior landscaping within the parking fields. Shores would look very different with a modern landscape code in that parking field. 70, we'll round it off to 73% impervious surface within the corridor, which as redevelopment occurs, that number needs to be managed. In the terminology I used as manage is, you have 73% impervious surface. You are in a redevelopment or infill of this. You're probably gonna still hover around that 73%. But that 72%, 73% right now of impervious has little to no stormwater management. And we could almost classify it as no stormwater management in that corridor. So I think one of the big numbers to concentrate on is in the redevelopment of that is your impervious numbers due to a developer's ability to get density and return on the infill remix is to add water quality treatments within that existing impervious infrastructure. I think we're all somewhat common knowledge. And what you can see by this photo, if you look at those areas that are too steep for development, if you can kind of take a snapshot of that, and I'm just going to go back a couple of slides. And show you the areas that are vegetated. Those are the areas that were not development friendly. So they remain vegetated, not necessarily out of regulatory decisions, but out of developability criteria. Some of the drainage patterns. Again, to this point, the majority of everything is runoff, where you're 75 to 100% impervious. Again, most of it is just built environment, and what remains green is land that was not developable. again, barriers to wildlife. If we go back to this building facades and then we look at building material, I think in this discussion, you can't just look at building materials, because those building materials, which would be within a potential palette of any architectural design guidelines, is the utilization of those building materials in the built form. So you may have clapboards, but they're clapboards on perhaps a less sightly building. This was a survey that the EDC did with the local business community as well as residents about the appearance of the corridor. Again, there's no clear vernacular associated with the architecture of the buildings. I'll just go back to that. And Liz would put, I'm going to steal a previous comment from Liz, and she can correct me if I misspeak, that this 40.7% inconsistency in facades, that isn't necessarily a bad thing. That differentiation between building elements and facades actually can build character in a community, as long as there's, we'll say, some commonality in vernacular. But you also don't want repetitive architecture on every facade. That communities and villages are made up of different building materials, similar vernacular, but change and difference is okay.
I would also add to that, Jamie, that it's a little short-sighted to just look at building materials without looking at the massing and the scale
Absolutely.
and the details.
Because you can put wood clapboard on a 4-story building and say it's cedar sided, but it may not still, with regards to bulk and density, be the best material of choice for a 4-story building, or a 3-story building, or even a 2-story building.
And I said this before, I think, and I don't know if we can get there through regulation, but branded buildings, CVS has a look, Walgreens has a look, the hamburger chain with the golden arches had a look. I think they've moved away from that. But that kind of Jack in the Box, or Pizza Hut, you can always recognize a Pizza Hut, even though half of them don't exist anymore. They've been repurposed, but they've got that roof. If there's a way to avoid that.
Again, strong architectural design guidelines, either initiated by the planning board, or some towns have separate architectural review boards, attempt to influence the design of that stagnant corporate architecture. But I actually just wrote an email to a neighboring community that there is no regulation that you can write to, in essence, ban a corporate prototype. Thou shalt not have corporate fast food prototypes allowed in town X. But there are ways through mandating or recommending building types, if you require a minimum 612 roof, the McDonald's won't necessarily look like a traditional McDonald's. You'll still drive by and know it's a McDonald's, but it changes the appearance slightly. If you don't allow buildings to be stuccoed, or only a proportion of the building being stuccoed, it'll change the appearance.
I think what I'm trying to get at is that when you drive down this road, it's not Anytown, USA anymore. You can drive all over the country and see these corridors with row after row of identifiable buildings. I know it's good from a corporate advertising standpoint, but it takes away that sense of local flavor, you know?
And again, I want to say, over my career, I've been relatively successful in changing stagnant corporate architecture. But there was a basis for that success in the underlying regulations. And some communities are willing to say, not now for that prototype, or willing to say no until that corporation decides the market is correct, I'm willing to invest in your community, and some towns are patient. There are other communities who have said, thank you for your input. Walgreens threatened to not build here if they're required to do clapboards and cornice molding in a nice building. And in some communities, they would back away from that discussion under the guise of economic development. They'd rather have a less attractive multi-million-dollar building than an attractive multi-million-dollar building that may not be built. But I've always advised those communities, that corporation is looking at your community because they want to be in your community, because they will sell 1 million prescriptions or more. And if you are just patient and reasonable, they may not come to you now, but they will be back. They will.
Like the original way back when, the McDonald's in Freeport, and of course there are other examples since then of,
Yeah, there are, Avon and Simsbury got a modified corporate McDonald's. I was successful getting a modified corporate McDonald's approved and permitted in one community. McDonald's decided due to cost not to build that. 10 years later, different commission, different planner. The beautiful McDonald's that was originally approved by a different board is not the one that was built there. It's Anywhere USA McDonald's corporate prototype, because they chose economic development over the aesthetics of their community. So sometimes the battle is well fought, but not won. And again, there are ways to work with corporations to give them their corporate identity. I mean, I think the planning board and zoning board and staff did justice to Dollar Tree. They still have their corporate identity, but if you remove the insignia, you could put 20 planners in the room and they wouldn't know what corporation was the retailer at that location. It also gives the developer value because it could be any retail outfit once one corporation has outlived their need or corporate structure for retail in an area. Again, some view sheds and corridors. Right now, these view sheds and corridors aren't, we'll use the term attractive, because again, they're car-centric with minimal landscaping. Again, some constraints to view sheds. Again, future needs sea level rise. And I think in some aspects, sea level rise may be the wrong terminology in the discussion of this area. I think what's more appropriate here in the discussion long term is the signification of events and the amount of events that are being held. You know, stormwater calculations were revised with regards to rainfall amounts for New England. And I think what you've seen, at least this summer, is the frequency of events and the strength of the events. And again, we have this discussion here on sea level rise, which affects more of our coastal assets and our saltwater ponds. Housing. Again, you have a viable commercial corridor, but really only one strong housing component in Indian Run Village. And opportunities within the corridor, safeable, walkable, reduction of speed, traffic calming, pedestrian amenities, pedestrian safety and favorability, RIP to bus routes, pedestrian screening from roads, and easier pedestrian access to businesses. And I've always been taught as a planner to try and control the controllable, things that are within your bandwidth. And, additional RIP to bus routes is not necessarily within your bandwidth. Basically, any additional bus route has $1 million price tag associated with it. It's almost $500,000 for the rolling stock and another $500,000 in operational costs just for one additional bus route. And, then you have to substantiate the need. So, but all of those other things are potentially within your regulatory control or financial control. Opportunities, again, green infrastructure, erosion mitigation, stormwater management, wetlands encroachment reduction, natural resources, habitat, conservation, biodiversity, vegetative buffers, adaptive development, development land balance. And I think what in that vegetation development land balance, in the redevelopment of the corridor, in the density that some of the developers are going to look at, it'll be a better utilization of that pervious area now. So there are a lot of functionally challenged parking lots that could be made more efficient with building location, access drives, and the combination of multiple properties. Ocean State Job Lot has 3 curb cuts. 2 are highly functional, and 1 brings you in and immediately makes you make a decision to go right, left, or stop while someone is crossing a traveled lane. So that's one development. In a redevelopment, you could easily change to 2 without actually increasing the parking, increasing stormwater management, and improving the aesthetics of that property. Visual elements, again, opportunities for residential housing, improved cohesiveness with buildings, and again, I would say architectural vernacular and finding some commonality within that architectural framework. Aesthetics, human scale development, site connectivity, visual quality, New England aesthetics, and accessibility. Those are the slides.
Can I ask about the slide with lighting, and what was I supposed to glean from that slide about lighting?
Nighttime, and I think the one before is daytime, right? Or just this one's showing you,
Yeah. These are kind of the streetlight systems along the corridor, and then this is all the lighting within the corridor.
Why would we consider those illumination opportunities with lots more light?
Because
Opportunities doesn't necessarily mean to add more. It means to
Yeah.
fix it.
areas to improve. If you look at the street lights to the right, those are standard highway lights. They're not necessarily dark sky compliant. Whereas you look at this setup here, those new modern lights are more night sky compliant. They're contained within a shoebox scenario, so all of the light goes down, doesn't go left, right, or up. Whereas a standard DOT light is designed to send the light immediately horizontal and not directed vertically down.
So the slide is suggesting then a replacement of our lighting system.
There are opportunities to improve your impact on night sky visibility.
Isn't it true that in any new proposal, night sky lighting is required?
Yes. So when Holly Street was being developed, all of their lighting had to be night sky compliant. Again, this was done 5 years ago. Durnick Works presented 4 years ago. So, again, this was done by students who didn't take a deep dive into the regulations, but our regulations require lighting to be night sky compliant.
Thanks. I also have a hydrology question, I guess. Like, when you're talking about rainwater and sheet what?
Sheet
Sheet
flow.
flow.
Sheet flow? Qu'est-ce que c'est?
So your question is, what is sheet flow? So a lot of times there are open and closed drainage systems. A closed drainage system would be, example would be a parking lot with catch basins that outletted to a detention basin. And that detention basin had water quality treatments, and then there was an outflow from that detention basin to a receiving water body or a wetlands. In some of the historic developments, there is no internal stormwater collection devices. So a parking lot may have an acre of pavement and not a single catch basin. All of the water sheet flows to either off property or to another state-owned collection system, and there's no pre-treatment. So in any and that's why I mentioned in any redevelopment, if you had a site that was 5 acres and it had 4 acres of pervious surface, the redevelopment of that property plan may still have 4 acres of impervious surface, but in that plan, they would be addressing stormwater management. So they would potentially be, even though they're keeping the same amount of pavement and building, they would be improving water quality by treating, whether it's catchment systems, pre-treatment, which they're required to do, even if they're doing underground infiltration. But it should, our regulations require improvements to water quality as well as DEMs.
So out here on Main Street, does the street runoff go down the drain right into the Saugatucket?
Some of it is designed to be infiltrated into the soil. Other overflows are caught and run in the existing piping systems with discharge to the Saugatucket.
Sheet flow is just what you see in a parking lot. It's just there's sheet flow and there's channel flow. So when it's raining really hard and you see water flowing across a parking lot, the issue with sheet flow is that it picks up everything in the parking lot. So oil, antifreeze, bird waste, whatever, it's all ending up, if it's not getting treated, it's going into a river or the bay or something, so.
So the key is you want to try and treat that and clean it up before it's discharged, either into the state system or into a water body or wetlands. Similar, if you remember the permitting for Burger King and that retrofit with the 2 drive-throughs, they made their best attempt, given the land they had, to do some pre-treatment of water internal to their site. Because again, they're a sheet flow site. What raindrop falls on their property, runs off their property to other abutting properties or within the state system. So without any treatment. There is some treatment now.
So, right, so the goal is to avoid sheet flow.
The goal is to avoid untreated sheet flow.
And also to create opportunities through good design, such as in green infrastructure, and to allow natural systems to allow infiltration so that you don't get to that point, or so that it's significantly lessened.
And if you're smart and use infiltration devices, one of the aspects is if a raindrop falls at Shaw's, the ultimate goal would be to put that raindrop back in the ground where it landed, not ship it 2 miles away in a piping system into a different system. So,
There are also, in addition to all the environmental reasons, there are legal and financial reasons, because if you allow sheet flow to just uncontrollably run onto abutting properties, you devalue or the usability of those properties. So most state laws require new development to deal with their stormwater on their property and not just say, I'll just let it go onto my neighbor's property, then it's his problem.
Right, and I do remember a proposal we were looking at where water was going to run downhill out the back onto, we had been provided with some photographs of the flooding that already happened on that spot. Right. All right, well, thank you, that all.
Any other questions or comments? Our next agenda item is planning objectives and hot topic items. Topic selection, preparation for upcoming follow-up meeting with the town council in September, i.e. affordable housing, design architectural standards, Old Tower Hill Road, Main Street. And that meeting, by the way, is the 11th.
actually, Madam Chair, that has been potentially modified to September 25th. I was made aware of that this morning, that it may be at the second council meeting in September. Excuse me, Joe? 25th.
Is that a possibly or a definitely?
It-
And can you let us
It's
know when
never-
and if it
It's
becomes a
never definite,
It-
but looking at the upcoming agenda with only one meeting in August and potentially what will be on the agenda at the first meeting in September,
Mhm.
the town manager informed me that it may occur at the second meeting in September. So, Peter, to address that question, working with Maria and having discussions with Maria on follow-up of that, there was both of our suggestions and conclusions that we add this to the work session this evening so that the planning board can discuss what their potential issues are that you want to discuss with council and try and develop the framework for that discussion, and also setting up the room so that every planning board member, in essence, is at a table interacting with the council.
There was a time several years ago when the town council work sessions would take place down here rather than up there. And I think if we were all at the same level, it would be a little more conducive to the discussion, if it's possible.
And now that we might potentially have a little more time to prepare, we
Right.
should use our time wisely.
So again, I know we'll say the hot topic items have been affordable housing, council supported or discussed continued dialogue associated with design and architectural standards for our commercial corridors, as well as moving forward most expeditiously as we can with Old Tower Hill Road and developing a scenario for that, as well as any regulatory changes that need to be made.
Can we add in that affordable housing discussion, affordable housing and short-term rentals? Make that part of the conversation?
And Paul, with that, I'm going to play that forward, that the discussion would be framed around short-term rentals and its effect on housing stock that potentially affects the market rate of a single-family residential
And I
home.
would say also its effect on community character. There are some neighborhoods in town where there are a lot of short-term rentals, rentals going to students for 9 months out of the year, in what were single-family residential neighborhoods. I mean, I'm thinking of Biscuit City Road, right across from URI. There are probably a dozen short-term rental homes in there with, 8 or 9 cars parked on the lawn during the school year. And that really changes the character of the community.
I think you would have 1 hour.
Yeah, if they talk a lot, it doesn't really give us a lot of time to.
Well, I do believe they have a strong interest in the Old Tower Hill Road corridor, and they made that pretty clear. And with any luck, with the potential for added time, perhaps a consultant may have been chosen by that time or getting close to it. So that would be something to share with them, and also share what we hope will be the outcomes. I think visuals are always a really good idea. And of course, that lends itself to the housing component as well. That's what's so great about mixed use.
Yeah, and they did say that they would like to have more work sessions with the planning board. So maybe keeping the topic limited and saying, but by the way, there are other things that we do want to discuss with you. Let's do this again soon.
I mean, if I may, to Peter's point, Old Tower Hill Road, and to Maria's point, within a month, we may be close or in negotiations with final scope of service and talking about price to bring a consultant on board. And then it is that consultant's duty within their scope to engage the council, engage the planning board, engage the community, and you're going to get that interaction through that setting where council can be as involved as they want as a council or as an individual. And again, to Peter's point, if you have 60 minutes and you have 4 topics, that's only 15 minutes a topic.
I doubt we'll have 4 topics, though. But we can make a list for future topics for meetings.
And I think, I would hope some of the focus, affordable housing is a broad subject matter. I don't know if you want to break affordable housing down, single family, mixed use, appropriate areas within the community, to try and structure the discussion versus an hour discussion or a half-hour discussion on, yes, we need more affordable housing in town.
Do
But
we
we don't have
have
any solutions.
do we have any sense yet of how the new legislation is going to make it possible to build more multifamily housing, more duplexes? I mean, I think did we determine that they've effectively done away with single-family zoning, or?
No.
They haven't.
Single-family zone, and I'll let Peter expand on that, single-family zoning is not banned. So there is not a mandate to, on a vacant lot, to build a single-family house and an accessory unit, or to only build a duplex.
So I guess my question then is, what is there in the legislation that makes it easier to build more housing stock or more affordable housing? Is there anything? I would presume that was what they were getting after.
The comprehensive permit process goes to a 2-step process versus a 3-step process. But what's unknown in that 2-step process, it goes to preliminary and final. But if everybody recalls the regulatory implications, preliminary requires them to do full engineering. So that means a substantial amount of resources spent up front, where the development community is used to getting vested at master and then spending real money at preliminary. By potentially eliminating master, that means, instead of spending 25, 30,000, they're spending six figures plus
So,
on any multi-housing project.
so it could slow things down.
It could be a financial disincentive to come to certain communities within Rhode Island.
And some of the, and Peter, correct me if I'm wrong, some of the legislation will have an overall impact on development in terms of potential for intensity and rate of speed, but not necessarily affordable housing, even though that was the intent.
First, that's right. A lot of what was changed is things that used to be reviewed as either major land developments or as minor land developments have been pushed to DPR. And a lot of what was reviewed as DPR by the board is going to be pushed to administrative review. So the process is going to be a lot. They're always pushing the process faster and faster. To your point, they didn't get rid of single-family zoning, but with regard to accessory housing, there is a provision that if you're in a zone that has a minimum 20,000, I believe it's 20,000 square foot lot, and an existing structure, you can, by right, put an accessory family dwelling unit within that structure. They also put some different provisions in that would override zoning for certain family member accessory family dwelling units, like an in-law apartment or something like that. So there's a lot, there's a lot to it, but no, they haven't just thrown out single-family zoning at this point.
So I guess I'm just thinking, if we're going to sit down with the town council and pick a topic and talk about affordable housing for half an hour or 45 minutes or an hour, what solutions can we propose? Now, Jamie's talked about coming up with a list of, pre-approved designs. There's just an article in Strong Towns about a community in Florida that's done this, and some really nice-looking buildings, and said if you come in with one of these, you can get administrative approval and build it. Or maybe more than one, I don't know how it would work, but, those kinds of solutions, we can say, these are the things that we would like to see happen to make more affordable housing stock. I mean, I think they know it's a problem. We don't need to come in and say, here's a problem, and here are the statistics, and here's how much you need to earn. I think they get all that. It's just, what can we do about it?
Yeah, again, Paul, to your point, there are some communities in Portland, as well as Florida. I think Texas has a few that have basically pre-approved accessory dwelling units. So,
Duplexes.
there's a duplex design. Some communities have the garage with the apartment above, that basically say, if you're willing to build this on your lot with this architecture, with these setbacks on your lot, you need administrative approval from the planning department and a building permit, but there is no other regulatory aspect. And the plans are already done. So right from design to full construction drawings, perhaps minus the foundation, but everything structural, good enough to give to a builder to bid the project and pull a building permit and start building it. Again, that's an attempt to expedite it. If you don't choose something that's pre-approved, it may be a longer, I want to say, in some communities, they actually, one is a week and one may be 6 months, because they're really trying to steer people to the pre-approved design.
Are those the kinds of things that would need town council approval to change regs or rules, or are those things that,
They, yeah.
zoning, okay. Okay. But I mean, I guess that's the thing to think about, is what sort of zoning changes do we need to make more affordable housing, more duplexes, more fourplexes, or even apartment complexes, but I know they're not our favorite, but
Well, and
know,
maintain that balance. the
Yeah, but I mean,
quality of life.
things that they have the power and the authority to change are what we should be suggesting if we've got their ears for an hour.
So Jamie, could you just expand a little bit on what you brought up a little bit earlier about having a somewhat structured and productive conversation so that we don't end up down a rabbit hole and so that both bodies would be well prepared enough so that that doesn't happen? Not that we won't be prepared, but.
It'd be great if we could finish saying, here's what we need from you.
Yeah, again, to me, you're talking about the structure tonight that, say there's, we had, I want to say at least 3 affordable housing, architectural standards, and Old Tower Hill. Structure may be that Old Tower Hill is an update of the status of where we are with the consultant in the process. Architectural design guidelines, potentially on the commercial side, will be also a result of that endeavor or phase 2 of that endeavor. But with regards to affordable housing, recognizing the need and talking about solutions with them. And I think communities continue to talk about the need without looking at the solution and also the obstacles to the solution. We have to realize in this community that a building lot, and Joe and Peter, I'll rely on you also as familiar with the marketplace, that whether it's a 1/4 acre, a 1/2 acre, or a 1 acre, there is a minimum entry level in this community regardless of lot size. And I want to say that entry level is in the $250,000 range, even for a 1/4 acre lot. So the mere fact that a 1/4 acre lot is $250,000 makes that potentially not affordable for anyone, even without a structure on it.
There was a house torn down on Rodman Street. I think you've probably seen the lot.
Yes.
It's 0.3 acres. I think they want either $340,000 or $360,000 for it.
And the house was torn down.
Yeah, the foundations, I mean, it was,
That's a $340,000 building lot.
yeah.
So even if you say, well, let's put an 800 square foot starter home or a 1,200 square foot starter home, you're still looking at a construction cost of $200 a square foot. So you're still 200. With the land acquisition, you're at 450, and Peter's smiling. Good luck doing 200.
Right, but I mean, I look at that lot,
So again, so the discussion is can you take that smaller lot, offer someone the ability to do an expedited duplex, and change that $250,000 upfront cost for the lot and divide it by 2, which makes it a unit cost of $125. Your construction costs don't necessarily double because you're sharing some common walls, but you still now have 2 kitchens and 4 bathrooms.
I look at that lot and I think quad.
Yeah. And again, there's some communities have approvals for triplexes and fourplexes.
And the question is, I don't know if it's zoned for it or not, but it certainly seems big enough.
Pete, is your mic on, Pete?
I think you have to get to like 4 families before it starts to mathematically make sense sometimes.
Yeah, a lot of developers are
Especially
trying
new
to get to $50,000 to $75,000 per unit land acquisition costs. And your unit yield in South Kingstown has to go up potentially to fulfill that marketplace. The issue is if you envelop a program and you become successful, those $250,000 or $300,000 lots, that baseline market value is going to change because now everybody knows they can get a 4-plex on it. So they may go from 3 to 400 because now it's a 4-plex lot, not just a single-family lot. So you have to be aware of those market conditions, and the baseline may change, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't try.
Question, how should we navigate the topic of ADUs, since there's not only currently so much confusion at the state level, but there will be more come January.
The legal.
That's a good question. You know, as of now, I think all we can do is go based off the statute that's currently enacted, which should have been corrected or clarified at the last legislative session, but wasn't. So, you know, until the General Assembly acts, we'll just have to operate under that statute.
Other than maybe a general discussion with the council about how we as a community would like to be able to utilize accessory dwelling units and how useful they could be.
I mean, by right, we can do that already. 750 square feet, right? The town of South Kingston, by right,
Yes.
property owner has that.
And duplexes are allowed by right in, I think, R20 and above, Brian? I think it's R20 and above,
We want
by
to
right.
ensure that we retain those rights and have the ability to
I mean,
make.
Duplexes used to only be allowed in R20 and R30 and 1.5 times the size of the lot. I think we changed that, right? I don't think we require 1.5 times, but I'm not sure duplex is allowed in the other zoning
Yeah,
district.
it's definitely not R20 and up because they don't allow them in the larger.
I thought it was R20 and R30, and then the lot size had to be 1.5 times size. That's what it used to be anyways.
1.5 time.
Yeah, so if you were in R20, you needed 30,000 square feet to have a duplex. But I think we changed that about 3 or 4 years ago, so that you didn't have to have the additional size.
And Jamie, I do think it would be useful to have some visual materials available as part of the conversation.
So I'm going to pull one up for you in a moment here.
Yeah, and in those visuals, I'm just thinking, you know, there are lots of neighborhoods still in South Kingston where there's a mix, you know, in the older parts of town of multi and single family. And, you know, showing that as much as everybody loves single family, those mixed neighborhoods do work.
So it's not Farmhouse New England. But again, this is Eugene, Oregon, where they have a pre-approved program for ADU design. There are multiple pre-approved footprints that people can pull building permits for and zoning permits for with an expedited permitting process.
I guess what I'm trying to understand is this doesn't, I mean, we're good with this. We don't need, people can come in and do an ADU, and we don't need to help them figure this out more, right?
Well, so what you're
Don't know
trying,
about it.
what you're trying to do is, if you pay an architect, we'll say $40,000 to come up with 6 pre-approved plans, those plans are ready to go. So someone who's contemplating it doesn't have to buy house plans, doesn't have to hire an architect, doesn't have to potentially
They can
go
do that
back and
though now,
forth.
right? Like, I mean, I could go online right now and buy 1,000 plans that fit between.
But most people, you're aware of that as a builder. The average, and what these communities did is a large PR push on programs, letting the community know that this is available to them. Here's the permitting process.
I think that's very valuable. Yeah,
Yeah.
I was trying to understand, what are we trying to achieve? We already have this rule, we're already allowed to do it. We just got to get the information out there that people, so they know that it can be done.
But most people, where do I start? I gotta hire a surveyor, but literally, these communities,
We're gonna have to do all that anyway. Jamie's not gonna give them a permit, the other Jamie.
Yeah.
Unless they have an engineer stamp it. I mean, if they don't
correct.
buy a pre-approved, they still have to get an engineer to stamp it.
But at least one component's already on the shelf, ready to go.
Can I just say that I would prefer not to promote the ease and access of ADUs until we get a handle on short-term rentals in this town.
Thank you.
Like, that's a great idea for that extra income in my backyard from an Airbnb. Like, I don't know, I don't want to encourage this.
And these can have, I mean, you've got the form, but this can have different skins on it, different
Yeah,
exterior material.
absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Not gray and black?
Right, I mean, it could be anything.
I think the pre-approval has some merit, has some good things to it, but I think there's also some drawbacks too. I don't know if we would want the same type of ADU design on, let's say, High Street, where you're in R10, that maybe you would be looking for in an R80 or an R40. So there's some good and bad. Just having them pre-approved doesn't mean that they're going to fit into the different situations that they might be applied to.
So what these communities have done is, through the discussion on architectural vernacular, they have different units that are appropriate in different areas. So it isn't necessarily, I hear you loud and clear, Joe, that it's not one size fits all. Because what may be appropriate in West Kingstown may not be appropriate for Matunic or Perryville. That, there are distinct areas in town.
See, where I see the value of the predetermined houses and stuff is if we go back to that cottage design and we tell someone, hey, you can take this lot and chop it up into 10 units. If you pick these 7 or 8 units that look like this, we can fast track this. It doesn't have to come in front of a board and all this other things. We, by right, if you pick these style of the home in this square footage, that'll get them to develop it faster. That's the piece.
And it's developing expectations. Again, that's what architectural design guidelines do. It gives a developer some certainty, or a homeowner some certainty, that if they adhere to these goals and objectives, that the permitting process is smooth and there's some certainty to the outcome.
I mean, so I think that's good about that. I don't know if I would stop right there, though. I mean, the idea of maybe increasing density in an existing house, if they can adhere to certain guidelines for that to be approved. Go back what Peter said, yeah, building, so I have a little bit different opinion than I think some of the folks on the board as far as the short-term rentals, and maybe because I have some short-term rentals, no doubt about that, that probably influences it. But, I think the underlying problem to all this housing is that it costs too much to bring a housing to market versus what somebody can rent it for. That's the bottom line. Because if it was less expensive to bring a housing to market, investors would build, right? So the long-term solution is trying to figure out how the regulations and how things that we influence the price of bringing something to market. Limiting income, whether it's through a rental for a URI student or short-term, is only putting your finger in the dike at the best. It's not affecting the long-term solution. The long-term solution is how do you bring houses to market at a rate that somebody can rent those out for or sell them for.
And Joe, you make a valid point, because, and again, some communities will look at a permitting process where ADUs are allowed if they're brought on the affordable side. Because one thing that can hurt a community is if you allow ADUs, which we do, and 50 of them come online, all at market rate. Your percentage of affordable to existing housing stock, you actually just slid backwards. Although your intent was to bring ADUs on board at an affordable rate, they're not rent or fee simple controlled. So you bring a more affordable unit to the marketplace, but you don't get credit for that affordable unit in the marketplace as it relates to your 10% on the comprehensive permit.
I think two things, just thoughts. One, I think it would be important for the council to understand how many more units we would need. We need the math, the data, right? And I know we're not going to get that 10%, but what's that number? How many more units do we need, which I think would be really important. I think another piece that we talk about
It's over 500, I know
right.
that.
So I think it's a good, we talk about we need more housing. There should be a number. There should be a scoreboard up there that says this is how many we need and how close are we to the goal. But put it in front of Wakefield School, everyone will, it's like a book drive or donation. I think the other piece too, that I think we forget, we have an amazing community. Everybody wants to live here. We talk about these college kids, they come in here, they rent the short-term rentals. That's only gonna affect the middle-class people. I have clients that are wealthy that buy homes here for the kids to go to URI so they have a place to stay. They will rent it because they're not stupid, because they want to make some money in the off-season. But if they don't have to rent it, they'll just keep it vacant. So I think by changing this no rental to whoever, you're going to start to segregate It's going to be more wealthy people that come here because their kids are still going to go to URI. They need them for a place to stay. They'll just buy the house and leave it vacant when they're not there, than have to rent it. The middle-class people rent it, the kid lives there, they rent it, they make some money, they stay in the summer. That's this blue-collar community that I grew up in here. But that'll go away, and then it'll just be really wealthy people that will just buy these houses and they'll just sit empty. It's not an issue of, because the price is so much, the people are just going to, the normal people can't afford it. So I think that's what's going to happen. We're just going to make it even harder.
It does seem like it is very popular, though, to have that winter student rental and summer Airbnb.
And I think there are places in town where short-term rentals are appropriate. I mean, this is a vacation community. People come here for the ocean, for fishing. Matunic, it makes sense. West Kingston, High Street. I mean, I was noticing as I was walking over, there's a house on High Street with 3 New York cars in the driveway, and it never occurred to me that it might be a short-term rental, but it sure looks like one tonight, so.
So Peter asked for some numbers. I'm one step ahead of you. No. So, and a lot of you'll be surprised by the name of some of these towns, but here's where we are in South Kingstown in 2022 with 13,000, I'm just rounding off, 13,000 housing units. 600 of those are affordable for 4.6. So to get to 10, simple math is you need another 600 units. Now, if you built another 100 or another 1,000 single-family homes, and every single one of those homes had an ADU, you just built 2,000 new units with 0 affordable. Affordable from a market rate condition, but not affordable in this table. But you look at communities like Central Falls, they're at 11, but Pawtucket, they're at 9. Providence is at 14, Woonsocket's at 16, Cranston, 5. North Providence, just under 7. Warwick, 5.4. Charleston, 2.7. So I think the point should be made in the discussion is, if you're at 4.6, what's reasonable? What's obtainable? Is it to get to 5.6? What do you need to do to move the needle? In order to build 600 affordable units at your inclusionary zoning take, or even a comp permit, if you built 1,000 units, you're only getting 250. You don't get there. You would literally need 3,000 units to be built to get 750 affordable to meet your 10%.
So here's a thought. Instead of thinking about the 10%, the people that run the monitoring agencies must have some sense of what the demand is, how many people are on waiting lists, or what do they think? I mean, forget about the 10% for a minute, because we know that's a hard, as you say, it's just a difficult target to get to. You can't do the math. But somebody must have some idea of what the demand is, how many people are.
I think the marketplace is telling us the demand. You had an applicant proposing a 70-unit apartment complex. You have another applicant in the queue proposing 60-plus units, a single family on North Road. So some of the marketplace is there. You kind of round those numbers off, and that's 150 to 200 units in the marketplace.
It doesn't tell you how many of the, what's the demand for people that are looking for affordable units? How many people are.
It's may be kind of surprising, but I am not aware of any statewide list that's maintained for people that qualify for and are looking for affordable housing. I have people call me all the time asking how they get on the list, and I have to tell them,
What list?
there is no list. It just hits the market. But according to a lot of the real estate agents I speak to, a lot of these affordable housing units never hit the market. They're bought all cash and by somebody who knows the builder, and they never hit the open market.
I was just wondering if, anecdotally, the people that are in the business of tracking affordable housing have some sense of what I mean, I think we all know the 10% is arbitrary. It doesn't necessarily reflect the actual need, just the legislature said everybody gets a 10%. But somebody out there must have a sense of what the demand is.
You know, and I would imagine the council would be interested in the fact that we need to be able to create housing that doesn't necessarily fall within our 10% mindset. That idea of the starter homes and small scale, appropriate, you know, within the appropriate zoning districts. So I think that's worthy of a conversation.
We had that, I think, that was the thought with the subdivision behind the police station. I don't think it necessarily turned out to be as affordable as I think we would have liked. I don't know, I think when you talk about somebody has to know how much affordable housing, it depends on, I think, how you're using the word affordable. If you're using it as the deed restricted, there's a lot of people that don't even understand what affordable housing is. It's amazing. I talk to people all the time. I have potential applicants coming to me all the time for rental property, and they don't necessarily know what affordable housing is. I think probably more accurate if you said somebody would need to know how many people are looking for housing in this place, lower and upper. That they probably have a better idea, right? Because you know they have the Section 8 and the housing authorities and the Johnny Cake Center and the Warm Center and all these folks. But affordable housing, I think people that need it probably don't even know what affordable housing is.
Well, I think
It's
there's
the price range you're thinking about.
the capital A affordable housing, and then there's just housing that's affordable. And I think that the common conversation, people don't even know there's a difference. We need more affordable housing. Really, to most people, means we need more housing which is affordable.
Within a certain price range.
Yeah, not the deed restricted. And I think there's also a big difference in every town in the state, because what's affordable is a stated price. It costs $300,000 for a 3-bedroom house. But in every town, what is the market rate, and what's that gap? You know what I'm saying? Between the market rate and what's deed restricted affordable. I mean, in Little Compton, it's a whole nother world compared to, say, Pawtucket. So there's that gap in between of who's deed restricted and then who can just afford to live there. I think our South Kingstown gap is just getting bigger and bigger each year right now between the market rate and what it actually costs you out of pocket to buy a deed restricted affordable house. Like, regular people can no longer afford to live here because the cost of a house is astronomical. And I don't see that falling, and I don't know what we can do to narrow down that gap. And I know that you have lots of rentals, but I think that the rental market and the amount of rental markets is what's making the houses as a whole more expensive in this town, because they're seeing as investments, not family investments.
Because they're neither
Oh,
small A affordable or deed restricted, income restricted.
Right.
I think a great exercise would just be that we educate everyone. I mean, it sounds like just what we're talking about here is like, we don't even all are not talking about the same thing. I think it would be a good exercise to talk about what is the town council really, when they say affordable, are they talking about like what Susan's talking about affordable? Are they talking about what Joe's talking about affordable, or what I'm talking about affordable? Because I've always under the impression we were talking about like blue collar or that kind of stock, and I think that stock moves to Coventry or other towns because of the great job this town has done to make it a really great place to live.
Right. But we hear people throw out workforce housing without knowing what that means.
I mean,
Middle.
think about a teacher on a starting salary. And so I'm looking at $325,000 for 500 square feet. You know, $325,000 if you're making $60,000 a year as a first-year teacher, and I'm not even sure they make that much. That's a heavy lift.
So I think what we can do, and I'll task Brian and I with that, is look at some of the economics of the social, economical reality of the marketplace. First thing, looking at, under the affordable definition of the statute, using 80% of AMI, what does that equate to in a house? 10% down, HOA fees, and what is that price? We know it's hovering right around $300,000, but we'll do that analysis. To Paul's point, what does a individual what is an individual making $60,000 a year? What do they have using the 30% model? What is their marketplace? And what you may find is at $60,000 in this community, there is no home for them. And then what is government's role to provide them with a unit? And the second aspect of that is what is a family potentially making, 40 and 40 or 40 and 30. We can do a couple of scenarios of a family making $80,000 a year as a household income. What is the marketplace for them, both on a purchase and a rental? And most of the difficulty we hear, and I've heard over the years, even on the affordability side, we have this issue in Connecticut. Developers always complain about this, is even when they bring an affordable unit under what's called 830G in Connecticut, they struggle to find a buyer who meets the criteria, who has 10% down. So a lot of times it's creative financing on the developer to creatively provide the down payment. Because, to Paul's point, if you're making $60,000 a year and you have rent and you have a car payment and you may have student debt and you have all these other bills, how many people have $28,000 sitting in the bank extra for down payment, 10% on a $280,000 home? That's a big ask for someone making $60,000 a year to have put away, I almost use the word squirreled away, but put away $5,000 a year for 6 years.
When they're 2 years out of college.
Yeah, so,
In fact, Jamie, it might be more than that. Even though you only have to put down 10%, maybe you can't afford the mortgage if that's all you put down.
correct.
I have a daughter who was in that situation recently, and she said, I can't make the mortgage payments unless I put down this much.
Right.
Mom and Dad, hello, Mom and Dad. So,
Yeah, no, Brian went through this with a family member, and what was affordable to the marketplace in proximity to their job, and they were well-placed outside of the Boston metro and ended up in Connecticut with an hour-plus commute, Brian?
50 minutes to Mansfield, Mass.
Because the marketplace did not exist for them, I should say, unless they wanted something less than this in the Boston market.
Yeah, my son wound up with basically a $290,000 house in Sterling, Connecticut, on an acre of land. Beautiful area, but you can't find anything remotely like that anywhere near here.
But that example goes back to what you said before, the underlying cost of the land. The reason why that's so expensive is because
It's a lot.
the lot has a certain
$337,000.
and that house has been for sale for quite a while.
Yeah.
But I mean, it does go down to the lot.
That 500,000, that 500 square foot house for sale is really a $325,000 house lot.
But I have to raise a question. If you decide as a young family that you want to live in Weston, Massachusetts, you know not even to look there. You don't even go, or Wellesley, Massachusetts, you don't even go there if you're not making a certain amount. You'd be foolish. And even though I know that's not the popular opinion, what is South Kingstown in that same role? If you know that you are not making enough money to live in South Kingstown, does South Kingstown have an obligation to provide every person at every income level with housing?
And that as a planner.
I mean, I wouldn't say this to anybody outside.
No,
of
but
the
as a
political-
planner and yeah, but as a planner and a member of AICP, my client is everybody. That's what my code of ethics says. And the difficulty is to that exact question. What is government's role in fulfilling that need? And, if you look at the Boston Metro, and even if you just graduated from Boston College and got a job in the financial district in Boston making 120 or 140 a year, you are not in the marketplace for a house
In Cambridge.
until you get out to some of the suburbs around Worcester and Leominster, Weston, Wesley.
Can I just,
You just-
to that
The
point,
marketplace doesn't exist.
why I keep beating the drum about apartments and about ADUs being 12-month rentals, because there are a lot of people who may not, for years, be able to afford to buy a home here, but there may be other opportunities for them to live here if there are more rentals.
So what happens in the Boston marketplace is that person who just got the job for 6 figures in Boston finds 2 roommates who pay $3,600 to $4,000 a month, or $1,200 a piece, or a bedroom. A lot of the Boston is typically priced by bedroom, so it's anywhere from $1,200 to $2,000 per bedroom. So if you have a 3-bedroom in a viable location in the Boston Metro, it could be $4,000 to $6,000. You find roommates. And that's the marketplace. So what is the role of government to provide that
I
to
would
that
go-
person?
What Paul was just saying is like, these ADUs are an opportunity for someone to buy a home and rent one of the pieces to make some more income. We talk about Airbnbs and how bad they are. You can buy a 4-unit place in Wakefield, you could not afford the mortgage with the conventional regular rental. So you have to subsidize that somehow. So you could take 4 units and rent Airbnb out of 2 of them to offset the cost, so you can pay the mortgage and the taxes and everything. And that would open an opportunity for someone that's living on the 3rd floor or the 2nd floor to say, I bought this building, I have these people helping me save the mortgage, pay the mortgage, and then move up. I mean, I know lots of people that did that. They buy a 2-family, they live in it. They buy a 3-family, they live in it, then they're able to afford the house because of that. But that person who, they may live in Wakefield, they may live now that maybe they got rid of that unit because they could afford it and then they bought on Ministerial Road or, right? So, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I'm going to disagree with you also because you look at it as the investors gaining something. The reason why those people are living there, because it's cheaper for them to live there and rent than to be able to buy a house, which they probably can't do. So by having that rental unit, one, they're benefiting because they are finding housing that they can afford, and 2, wherever they're employed, whether it be the local retail store, whatever, that's allowing them to live locally. So,
People who are renting, yes.
yes.
But how about the people who are renting who are not here year-round?
Yeah, I think,
We're going to just disagree, I think.
no, I think the point you're trying to make is that the people that, if I own 4 ADUs in South Kingstown, right, and I'm, or not ADUs, but I have 4 rental properties that I'm renting out as short-term rentals, Airbnbs, rather than to year-round families, there's no benefit to the town in that. The investors, but I think let me finish. If I own a home and I have an ADU and I rent that out as an Airbnb, I'm not going to have wild parties happening at Airbnb, and I'm getting the benefit of that extra income to pay for my home in South Kingstown. I think I could live with that. I would still prefer to see something be a year-round rental, but I think when you've got somebody who owns a bunch of Airbnbs who lives in Boston and is just making money on the Airbnb market down here, they're taking away housing from people that could otherwise benefit from it, and that I'm opposed to. Right. But what if that person living there was a teacher or a policeman or a fireman, you know, a year-round resident who, as Jamie said, you know, there's a benefit to having a diverse community, different income levels. I mean, all of those things make it a better town. I don't want South Kingstown to be Barrington.
You know,
No, it isn't. It isn't.
I don't want it to be Provincetown.
Right. You don't want it to be.
I don't want this to be Provincetown.
you know, I think something we still haven't even really got a handle on is what exactly is the problem we're trying to solve, and what is the reasonable expectations. If South Kingstown was the universe, nothing else was around us, no other towns, we could solve the problem, right? Because we could just make sure we have enough housing just for this local community, but we're not. As we make things more affordable, we start solving not only our problems, we start solving North Kingstown's problems, Charleston's problems, and Warwick's problems, because people can move down here because they actually like it, right? So what is, I guess, it's not a problem, I think to some extent, I look at this, it's not a problem you can solve. What it is a problem that you can influence, and you can maybe put pressure when it's appropriate. So it's not that we're gonna solve and everybody's gonna have housing. What we really look at is indicators. Can our children stay here? That's an indicator, right? That's as our retail shops have enough help to provide us the services that we need to live. These are the indicators that we actually look at. And when those indicators start getting out of whack, then we realize we need to have more housing. But we can't solve this problem. All we can do is influence it when these other indicators show that, you know, we really need to, I guess, we need to put effort into that area. So,
But Joe, isn't it true that if you wait till the indicators are out of whack, you've got a problem? You've got to have things in place. Yeah, you've got to have something in place to, oh, sorry. You have
Thank
to
you.
have some kind of guidelines or rules in place to keep it from being out of whack.
Well, you know, I think given the fact that we do now potentially have another meeting before our joint work session with the council, which will give us a little more time to kind of consolidate the conversation, we need to think about how to use the appropriate terminology, have the discussion about the fact that the 10% may be fleeting in nature, and that we may try our best to influence, but we may not necessarily solve it. I think that was a good way to portray our efforts.
Yeah, you're going to be able to influence market conditions, but you're not going to be able to manipulate or control. Because in the end, if you did a zone change that said every 1 acre lot in town can have up to 4 single-family units on it. Well, that 1 acre lot that used to be valued at $400,000 just went up to about $700,000, because a developer can now afford to pay 7 divided by 4, which is still under 200, which is less than the 4 he would have paid for the 1 unit. So he could do 4 really nice homes on that 1 acre, and they'd all have 10,000 square foot lots, and you can build a pretty nice house along the shoreline on 10,000 square feet, as long as you can get, you know, sewer and water solved. So you can attempt to make that more affordable, but the market conditions, if, you know, if they build a house for 600 and market conditions change and they can sell it for 1.2, developers aren't going to sell it for 7 or 8. They're going to sell it for whatever the market can. Same to Joe's point. If 2-bedroom units all of a sudden go to $600 a month, developers aren't going to be charging 12. They're going to go to that market condition.
I mean, I think the land definitely helps, that's a big piece of it, but I don't think we can get there to where we need to be. And I'm not looking at necessarily the 10%. I'm looking at those other indicators, like, such as, can our children stay here, and can we have people that work at these stores? I don't think we can get there if we keep thinking about single-family freestanding structures.
Right.
I mean, just the cost of the building, and, I mean, I don't know, what is it, 300, 400, 500 a square foot? $500-600 a square foot? You can't, you can't get there. If you're spending $500 a square foot, A dwelling unit, minimum 1,000, 1,200 square feet, it's not affordable. I think we really have to start thinking about increasing the density by not necessarily single-family freestanding dwelling units.
Yeah, I agree. I think we could leave the short-term rentals out of the discussion with the town council, because clearly we're not of one mind on it, but I think just saying, look, more multifamily, more apartments, more duplexes, quads, anything that adds housing stock is going to help.
I disagree, and I don't think we can just build our way out of this, because adding a lot of housing will reduce the cost of housing in this town, not because it's going to make them less expensive, but because this is going to become a less desirable place to live. And I know how snooty that sounds, and I don't mean it to sound that way, but if we had 30,000 people here today, and you raise that to 50,000 people, it's not going to be cheaper because there's more housing, it's going to be cheaper because it's lost its rural character, which is the whole reason we want to live here. And that's why it's going to become more affordable, is because people who want that elbow room or have come here because of whatever character it has are going to have to go somewhere else to find that.
Well, I agree with you 100%, and I think that that's why having the change in the discussion maybe, and not just talking about trying to solve this housing problem, but understanding more of what's the problem we're trying to solve, and what is when is enough is enough, because just building more houses, just building more structures, again, we're not going to solve the problem, because then we're going to start having people from other communities come in because it's desirable, and
Well,
it's
and it's not just that. To look at the South Kingstown global perspective, the issue of cost of community services and infrastructure is not one that we nor the council can ignore.
Yeah.
But I think
Sewer, water capacity, traffic, water quality, all of those things are impacted by increase in density. So finding a balanced approach is really the most pressing issue, if you think about it.
I think if
How can we influence it yet maintain our ability to provide for the things that a community generally has to provide for?
I think if we think about what is a healthy housing stock, not necessarily trying to solve these all problems, but I think a lot of us, though we may have come from different backgrounds, I think housing, we think about you get an education, hopefully, or you trades, and then you start off on your own, you live in an apartment. And then maybe after the apartment, you look at buying a starter home, or you've started to buy a duplex where you live in one side, and then from there you graduate up to maybe a middle house or maybe a forever house. And do we have that diversity that would support a community to go through that life cycle and start thinking about what is healthy versus that we just have to solve this and build more housing? What is healthy for a community our size?
And that's why I keep harping on starter houses, because I don't think we have many.
So starter houses, there's a national discussion that the terminology, in essence, doesn't exist anymore due to land values. So that a starter home in town is $400,000.
And Joe, I agree with you, but I've got to say, and it's anecdotal, but how many people do we know, who have been kicked out of their rental, their year-round rental? How many families that we know that no longer have a place to rent because the building's changed hands and it's going to a different market? Where there is a ton of people in this town who have been annual renters who have lost their place to live since COVID started. In the last few years, those rental apartments, those year-round rental apartments, are simply no longer available, so all of those people are displaced and now can't find rentals and can't afford to buy a house here, because all of those rentals have stopped being available to them.
I mean,
Like, there's a lot of people around town who
you have a lot of other communities in Rhode Island that don't have, maybe not as desirable for short-term rentals, right? We're desirable because of the beaches and that type of stuff. And they have just as much housing problems as we do. I mean, I own rental property up at Johnston, and I'll tell you, I had 9 apartments come available in 2 months. I advertised 3 of them. Out of 3 advertisements, I rented all 9 the first night. And 6 of them were sight unseen.
Should have raised your price, Joe.
I mean, that's.
But I want,
I think it's important that we just define what we're really looking for, because
One-
I don't think anyone really, I don't think we're talking about it, and we can say we want X, but we don't want Y to happen, and it's a pipe dream. It's not real. We're living in fairyland.
Just to-
So we can say do we really want to solve the problem or not? And I guess at some point, we have to stop talking about it, or we're not going to do anything about it. We can talk about it till we're blue in the face.
The ability to influence.
just, and it's an expansion of what Peter kind of stated. You have to look at this from two perspectives, if not more than two. People who live within the community internalize the view of the community, that this is the community I live in. It is not if there are more houses, it's not the community I would like to move to. The other perspective is someone who doesn't live in this community, who lives in a more populated community, is always potentially moving to a more rural place. So someone who lives in Rye, New York, was looking for a summer home. Even if this town had 5,000 more houses, it's still going to feel rural. It's always going to feel less populated to someone else who lives in a more populated area. So it's the aspect of internal of what you view your town as, and then it's the prospective person moving to your town from a different community, and you're always going to be under those pressure. Carol Baker, in our GIS person, is working on a calculation for me of how many vacant lots are available today to build units on. Because there's the perception of rural, but there are probably 500 or 600 ready-to-go house lots that people just haven't chosen to build on yet. So without even doing another subdivision or another development, the community could change just by people walking into the building department and deciding to build now. And to Peter's point, because he's in the marketplace, people are always looking to move potentially from a dense to dense, less dense to more dense to less dense, but it's always in the purchaser's view. If someone's moving from West Hartford to here, they may figure this less dense. If someone's moving from Brown and College Hill, they're down here is always going to be less dense than Providence or East Providence. So it's that perspective as time goes on. I know we're always resistant to change, and we want change to occur in a way that minimizes the impacts on the existing residents. But I just want you to think about other prospective people who want to move to your community and what their sense of your community is. So, I don't want to scare you of that. I'm not a proponent of building 5,000 more units in town, but someone is always looking to move to your community because it's desirable. And it's desirable as a community also based on your location to the Atlantic Ocean. And that's not going to change.
Well, what's our ultimate goal? Is it to preserve the town and what we sense in the town? Or is our goal to attract new people to come here? Like that's, I mean, I think, but if your goal is to just be less dense than the other place, so that we're hoping to get more people here, that's a different goal than I think other people in this town might have.
Susan, describe to me what you mean by preserve the town.
Keeping it low density.
So the built environment.
So no new houses?
The number of people you have to interact with on the street, the number of convenience stores you're going to have to look at.
But I think we can
So the built environment, what about the people that live in it? Because a lot of people moved to this town because it was a nice place to raise a family, because it had good schools, and you got people who participated in the community. Police officers who work here could afford to live here. School teachers who work here could afford to live here and mix with the students that they taught. That doesn't happen anymore.
But
If
Jamie,
you don't change the built environment, you are not preserving the community.
the community's going to change.
I understand that, but Jamie's talking about attracting those folks from Rye, New York, because we're less dense here.
No, I'm not, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is you're always looking at it from the perspective of living in the community and what's important to you versus the prospective person who wants to move to a community like yours. Right? Susan, if from your perspective, if you and your husband were moving, you would look at a similar community to South Kingstown. Those attributes, that style. You probably wouldn't look at a more dense community. But there are people who live in much more denser communities who would consider South Kingstown to be out in the boondocks. That, my God, you only have 2 grocery stores. I have to drive 20 miles to a Whole Foods. Actually, I have to drive 40 miles to a Whole Foods. That it's a different viewpoint, and I'm not a proponent of change. I'm just saying, look at the perspective of that person who is willing to pay $300,000 for a house lot in this community. People are paying $500,000 for half-acre lots.
I think this idea of community character, you know, we've talked about stone walls, landscaping, vegetation, you know, the quality of driving down some of the roads once you get out of Wakefield, Peacedale area. I don't think anybody wants to see apartment complexes in West Kingston, but I think there are places where more density can be appropriate if we think about complete streets, about what we want to do with Old Tower Hill Road. If you can make more bike path connections, make a community that's more walkable, that's more bikeable, then maybe the traffic congestion that comes with more residents isn't necessarily as bad as you might think it would be. I don't think anybody wants to see us look like Warwick around the airport or some of those densely developed neighborhoods that were built in the 50s and 60s. But I think we can have our cake and eat it too. You know, we've talked about, there was a subdivision on South Road where I think we said, you know, could you tone down that entrance a little bit? We don't need a great big stone sign that announces the new subdivision. Just blend it in with the road. It's a new street. It's there. It doesn't need to shout its arrival. You know, we've seen some good projects, some infill development where we're getting more apartments, residential units. You know, I think there are ways to preserve community character without necessarily saying you can't move here because, you know, if you weren't born here, you can never be from here. I mean, I was a 40-year-old college graduate making $40,000 a year, and I was able to buy a house down here, mainly because my wife had family here, and we didn't want to send our kid to Providence schools. But, you know, here I am now, 25 years later on the planning board, so.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
the only other point I'd throw in is that as the board's discussing crafting policy to balance these interests of preserving the rural nature of the community and increasing housing stock, I think it's just important to keep in mind that the town's going to be faced with a metaphorical tsunami from the General Assembly on January 1st. So, when you're thinking of, well, what policies are going to allow creation of housing stock, just to use an example, as of January 1st, an adaptive reuse must be a permitted use in any zone, which means changing a commercial use to a residential use, and it has to at least allow a minimum density of 15 units per acre. So, as you're thinking, how are we going to increase our housing stock? Policies like that, and there are a number of them, that's just an example. You're going to have to be figuring out how those work, and I think it's just going to be a lot of work for staff and the board just to keep your head above water as those policies are implemented.
You're absolutely right. I think also we might need to consider some kind of an expanded role for the TRC to help to manage it. So that it either comes under an administrative type definition or something to that effect.
I think the only last thing I would say is that piece you're talking about, whatever the General Assembly changed all these rules. I think we forget that the towns that have the power in the state, the more people in the House and the Senate have way more, like Providence, Central Falls, all these other communities. They don't give a shit about us down here. They're gonna change, they already meet the requirements, so they don't care. So if we don't figure this out, they're gonna make the rules for us in Providence, and we have no say in the matter. This is the first wave of it. It's gonna keep coming. So we can sit here and say, we don't want strangers to live here, or we don't want this, or we don't want that. If we don't fix it, they're gonna fix it for us, and we're not gonna have any say.
That is very true. And they've all,
Yeah, but you know, like I mentioned to the town council, right? The town can take land that the town owns and put affordable housing on it. And then there was this cry of, oh no, then you know they're all together. And I think that those people, you know, I like to be similar to my neighbor. I don't want to live next to a Newport mansion because we don't have a lot in common. And I don't think there's anything terrible in taking a big chunk of our problem and fixing it by saying, okay, here's some affordable housing.
you raise a really good point, which has been echoed this evening about the fact that affordable is not understood. There's the big A and the little a. There's deed restricted, income restricted, and that stigma is something that it's not appropriate and we're trying to get away from. So there is a lot of education that needs to be done. So back to, this has been an excellent discussion this evening, back to the fact that we want to be well prepared for our work session with the council.
Maybe we shouldn't discuss affordable housing with them.
No, but perhaps Jamie can find a way to synthesize some of these things, and if necessary, send the council in advance either some kind of a cheat sheet or something to that effect that will help to explain some of these things. So
Define
we
the
don't either
terms.
go around and around, go down a rabbit hole, you know.
We will
Make
do
it
our,
productive, keep it productive. And
we
we'll
will
have
do our,
another meeting now, theoretically.
we will do our best to synthesize the discussion tonight and maybe put together
Some visual.
a small white paper, 10 PowerPoint type slides, bullet items, financial aspects of what affordability is, what affordability means to South Kingstown, and also noting back that, you know, a lot of the people on the council and some people on the planning board live in subdivisions. And when you bought a house in that subdivision, or when that subdivision was developed, it changed the community forever for the person who lived there before the subdivision you live in was developed. So change happens. And you, at some point of the time, by the nature of moving to this community, except I know Paul's in an existing older home, changed the community in the mere fact that you live in one of those subdivisions.
And of course, with some discussion about capacity.
Mhm.
Madam Chair, just quickly, the documents that I circulated, just for some explanation, I had these downstairs from an affordable housing event. One is a cheat sheet that I created for ADUs. It's just sort of a quick and dirty outline of the fundamentals of our ordinance. And the other sheet is a selection of graphics and information from the Housing Works Rhode Island Fact Book for 2022.
Thank you, Brian. This will be very useful, I think. So why don't we continue on? I know that there has been some interest in talking just a little bit about some of the other boards and commissions, not necessarily under specific liaison activities, but ways in which the planning board could better integrate and perhaps get assistance from other boards and commissions. You know, they have all been fairly active. I know that the Sustainability Commission has been working on trying to create, for quite some time, some means to have composting in the town, whether it's a municipal composting type of system or improving the education as far as composting. The Conservation Commission has been working on trees as they relate to a tree program or a rewrite of our tree program, and the impact of climate change on our trees and how they're important for cooling the area, absorbing rainwater, and so on. The EDC has been working on Old Tower Hill Road, the Saugatucket Park. So there may be an opportunity for us, particularly when we're trying to, which will be coming up relatively soon, talk about our goals for next year, other than attempting to deal with the impact of the incoming tsunami, how we can better integrate with some of those boards and commissions and utilize their help. I know that when we did our last kind of annual action agenda, we talked about getting some assistance or asking some of the boards and commissions. I think we asked the Affordable Housing Collaborative to research the church community housing project that was built in Charlestown that was 100% affordable. So there may be, we think about this a little bit, ways in which we can have them assist us, perhaps have a UN-style meeting, work session at some point where we invite them to have a conversation with us, just,
I think, Madam Chair, there has been some discussion of some of the other boards and commissions of potentially being able to come to a work session, similar to what town council is doing, that maybe it's monthly for half an hour in your work sessions, or every other, odd months that you have a half hour or 45 minutes of your work session for a board or commit, whether it's EDC or Affordable Housing or Historic District Commission, come before you and have a roundtable discussion. What's important to them?
that letter from
Yeah.
HDC, because they have very specific criteria and authority that they must uphold, and they would like to have a meeting with them.
Again, depending on workload, maybe we can start with HDC in November, October, November.
I mean, that's one approach. I mean, or perhaps, as Marie mentioned, we could possibly have, or at least a kickoff meeting where we have it with a lot of the boards, or all the boards, and maybe the chair of each board just spends 10 minutes on what they're actually working on, and everybody would understand what others are working on, and it would be an opportunity for boards to maybe express what they could, where they could get help from the other boards, or how they can help the other boards.
Again, we could do that in October, November,
Meetings.
work session.
I like that idea too. I think having everybody together, we don't have to do it all the time, but as a kickoff, just, everybody needs to hear, because we may share a lot of the same concerns.
I would think that that's actually would be something for a good annual or a biannual. But then the individual boards where they have a common, something they're working on, can maybe, have a, whatever it is, a quarter meeting or quarterly meeting. Yeah,
Yeah, there was one of those town gown meetings with legislators and you all. There's not enough,
I can't speak for the other boards, but, I mean, for the affordable housing, I've been liaison for several years now. And, I get the sense that they get a lot of good people who want to do something, but we get feedback, right? We get feedback because once a month, people come here and we have projects and there's a closure to those projects, and sometimes it's good feedback and sometimes it's bad feedback. But I think some of these other boards, they feel like, that they're not getting anything accomplished, or there's not that feedback, or there's not that interaction, or they're not influenced. So I think that, so I get the sense, at least from the affordable housing, that if we had that and we actually tasked them with something, I think it would help.
achievable, right. Legal legislative updates? Anything that,
If we could combine items D and G, I can give an update on legal matter involving the board, and also how some of the recent legislative changes are affecting that. So in particular, there's been 2 changes to state law involving the Comprehensive Permit Act. First, the State Housing Appeals Board is going to be disbanded as of January 1st. And also, as of January 1st, a comprehensive permit application is no longer going to be a three-stage application process with master, preliminary, and final. It's only going to be a two-stage process. First, they'll come for their pre-app, then they'll have preliminary, and then it says that final is required to be administrative. So those changes have been made to law. They're going to come into effect on January 1st. I'd also give you an update on, we have an appeal pending before the State Housing Appeals Board that was taken by the applicant on the District 5 apartments. So when the appeal was initially taken, there was some indication from the legal counsel to the State Housing Appeals Board that they probably wouldn't reach a decision. But since that time, the applicant's attorney is trying to get an expedited hearing on the matter. I think what they're trying to do is, while SHAB is going out the door, just get the blessing so that they can come back and say, well, SHAB upheld our master plan, so now you have to accept all these conditions when we come in for preliminary. But in my mind, there's an interesting issue raised by the fact that they're appealing a master plan denial when, as of January 1st, master plan isn't going to even be part of the process anymore. So I just want to let the board know that what I'm thinking of doing strategically is to, I'm not hiding it from anybody, so that's why I don't mind saying it at a public meeting, is potentially filing a motion to dismiss the appeal as moot. And the reason I was thinking of that is because since this three-stage process will no longer be applicable, they're not really going to win anything by winning on the appeal, because all they'll win is a reversal on something that's not even part of the process anymore. What they're actually probably going to want to get out of it is SHAB waving their finger at us and saying, you must do X, Y, or Z. I don't think that's an appropriate reason to take the appeal, so that's why I'm thinking of filing a motion to dismiss it as moot. That will do two things. So there's that. Then I just would put out there, if that's, it may be the case that even if that argument was accepted and SHAB decided not to make a decision, or if they just let the clock run out and they don't make a decision, it may be that the applicants for District 5 just come back after January 1st and apply for the preliminary plan. Now, they'd have to get all their application materials together. That would probably be pretty expensive for them, but at least at that point, they'd be coming back without a thumb on the scale, if you will, from SHAB. So just wanted to give you that update, and that's...
Thank you. Why don't we move then on to planning board liaison activities? Joe, anything new from that? Thanks. The Scenic Stewardship Committee meeting is going to be possibly held. It was originally scheduled for August, but will be probably rescheduled for September, October. We have a consultant on board and hope to move forward in a relatively short period of time to get the plan written. That's all I have. Jamie? Any other updates from staff?
Just town council meeting next week. We are discussing with them the makeup of the stewardship committee. It's 11-member committee. You're down to 5 or 6 members, which means 6 is a quorum, so you really need full participation. So they'll look at the complexity of that committee. We also have medical marijuana back before council so council asked the planning department to modify the regulations to bring them in alignment with the recreational marijuana. So that'll be before council, so they can refer to the planning board for review and opinion, back to the council to have a meeting. The other aspect we have is a regulatory change and a map change for the proposed EMS building on Ministerial Road. We're recommending to create a GI-1 to allow municipal services to be built within that particular zone, as well as nonprofit land trust activities. That'll hopefully go to council Tuesday night, then they will refer that to you. So that would potentially appear at your next work session in September. And depending on work agenda load, could appear at your regular scheduled meeting earlier in September. That's all I have. Update.
Oh, you know what the other thing, when we somehow, by some miracle, create more time, well, this, I don't remember what year this was even published in, the South Kingstown Subdivision Land Development Projects, A Citizen's Guide. It's extremely obsolete, and I don't know if there's still a pile of them in the planning office.
It may be 10 years old or so, yeah.
It's just, at some point, need an intern. If there's nothing else, would someone like to make a motion to?
Could I offer we discuss something? You know, we're always pressed for time, and I think that it is probably a strategy, but an attorney can get at that podium and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk about things we've all read already. We should have a process where maybe Madam Chair could say, so we've read this, does anybody on the board have a particular question about this? Let's move on. Right, because they take up the whole night saying what we've already all read, and then the public's waiting to speak, we're waiting to speak, and we're running out of time.
Yes, and that is an issue that happens in every community, because they need to make their presentation, even though we may have read the documents, the public may not have. So finding that balance between allowing them to be adequately thorough so the public has an understanding of the project and can then follow up with appropriate questions, versus shortening it up so that it's not well-rounded enough that the public really understands what's going on. And even though we now have plans that are available online,
I was going to say, don't we?
that doesn't mean the general public will have them and
I still think it's,
to speak and to ask questions, and we can't take that away from them. However, we can and have asked, particularly legal counsel that comes up, to move it along and let's get to the meat of things and let the engineers and the landscape architects speak, so that we don't get that initial lecture as we have gotten in the past.
there's not a lot of point for me to do all my homework when I have to sit here and listen to it all over again.
One thing I will say, Madam Chair, is you can always encourage an applicant to be concise or expedite their presentation, but I would caution you on ever telling them, we've heard enough, or you need to wrap it up, because that is giving them an appeal that is ripe for a due process claim. So unfortunately, Robin, in some instances, you have to let that developer speak, because they're creating a record, and that record is always appealable by an abutter or appellate status within there, or
Maybe we can change the way they leave that record, since it is available online.
I would strongly discourage you from ever asking the attorney to say, I've heard enough, I've read the material, you don't need to tell me your side.
And
You are giving the applicant an approval in an appeal by doing that.
But one of the ways in which we could better improve community engagement is to update this, is to have some means by which we reach out to the community so that they better understand how the process works. Of course, now will be drastically changed thanks to the General Assembly, however, and that's going to be very upsetting for members of the public when they find that they no longer can speak on a subdivision of 7 lots, and that we will no longer review.
You know, it would be an easy thing to do when we have to put up those orange signs, right? Something's coming, before the planning board, those notifications. Put a QR code on it with a link to the webpage for that project. I mean, QR codes they don't cost anything to make. They're cheap to print. You could slap something up on that sign and say, more information, scan the code. And send people right to the website where at least they know at that point that plans exist online, that they're review documents. I mean, I don't think it'll shorten our meetings any, but it might be a way to get us, people a little bit more educated when they come in.
I mean, we only have a certain window of time to make decisions, and they're eating up most of that evening by restating what we've all read.
The process.
I just think it doesn't make sense. Right, but isn't that the problem? No one else gets to say anything. Oh, no, that's what we're here for, is to listen to the abutters. Right. And to preserve our town.
Susan?
I just have another question, kind of going back to staff updates. Are we moving along with a sign ordinance in town? Can I just ask for what we were at with that? Because we were working on it and then it went away, I think.
We'll give you an update at the next work session.
Thank you.
If no one else has any other comments or questions, would someone like to make a motion to adjourn? Motion from Joe, second from? Paul, Joe. It's always Paul and Joe, right? All those in favor say aye.
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 Meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone.